There's a very specific kind of story that sneaks up on you, the kind that doesn't kick the door down with explosions or plot twists, but instead taps you on the shoulder with one quiet sentence and suddenly your chest feels tight, your throat goes dry, and you're leaning closer to the screen like it might tell you something about your own life. And sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak Kita, released in 2025, is absolutely that kind of story, because it starts with something so small it almost sounds like a misunderstanding, like a child saying the wrong word to the wrong man at the wrong time, until you realize it might be the right word to the right man at the only time that could possibly matter. And that's when the whole premise hits you like a memory you didn't know you had. A little boy sees a familiar necklace, his eyes lock onto it with the certainty only children have, and he calls a stranger, Dad. And that single word turns the air electric, turns the room into a courtroom, a confession booth, and a battlefield all at once, and you can feel the past stirring behind the character's eyes before anyone even says another line. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel Bongo Gaming, and let us know where you are listening from in the comments. Now, when I tell you this is one of those modern romantic melodramas that understands the power of restraint, I mean it, because the movie doesn't rush to explain itself like it's afraid you'll click away. It trusts that you'll stay if it gives you something real to hold on to, and what you're holding on to here is fate wrapped in ordinary objects, a necklace, a name, a glance that lasts half a second too long, the kind of silence that happens when two people realize they've been living in parallel timelines and suddenly those timelines collide, set against that polished, emotionally sterile corporate world where a CEO's life is measured in meetings and headlines and share prices. The film asks a very UN corporate question. What happens when the life you built is interrupted by the life you were supposed to live, or the life you already live but refuse to name out loud? The release in 2025 feels important because it arrives at a time when audiences are both exhausted by empty spectacle and hungry for intimacy again, hungry for stories that don't just entertain but bruise a little, because bruises mean you felt something, and this film very deliberately aims for the soft parts of you, abandoned timing, unspoken love, parenthood that comes not with planning but with consequences, and a woman whose toughness isn't a costume but a survival skill she's had to wear for years. The premise, as we're given, is deceptively simple. 6 years after saving CEO Jiang Nanyang, Chishu crosses paths with him again, and a small boy, one who clearly belongs to Chishu in every way that counts, spots that same necklace and instantly calls Jiang Nanyang father, and the universe doesn't just reunite them, it drags them back together by the collar, forcing questions neither of them has dared to ask, forcing emotions that have been kept sealed like letters never sent. And I love that the film begins with history already baked in, because it doesn't treat the past as a prologue, it treats it as a ghost that still lives in the house, and you can tell from the first act that everyone is haunted in their own way. Let's talk about that opening hook in the narrative itself, the way the movie frames Chishu returning into Jiang Nanyang's orbit. It could have been a coincidence played for shock, but instead it's staged like inevitability. You feel it in the pacing. You feel it in the way the camera lingers on the necklace when it appears, not as an obvious clue, but as a relic. That necklace is a symbol, yes, but it's also a trigger. It's the kind of object that doesn't just remind you of someone, it reminds you of who you were when you last saw them. And that's what makes the boys, Dad, line feel like a thunderclap, because it doesn't just imply biology, it implies a missing chapter. It implies a secret carried for 6 years. It implies a wound disguised as strength. Now, without diving too hard into full spoilers right out of the gate, the film's story overview is basically a slow, emotionally escalatory unraveling. Chishu is no longer the person who once saved a powerful man and then vanished into the background like a good deed done in silence. She's a mother now, and the film makes sure you understand what that means. Her time is not hers, her choices are not theoretical, her risk tolerance is different, and her heart has been forced to grow bigger than her fear. Jiang Nanyang, on the other hand, is the kind of CEO character that could easily become a cardboard cutout, cold, aloof, arrogant, the usual, yet Sang Wanita Tang finds a more human angle by emphasizing not just his power but his isolation. He's surrounded by people, but none of them see him. He signs papers, but none of them touch him. He speaks, and no one hears the person behind the title. So when a child calls him, Dad, it's not just scandalous, it's intimate. It's an invasion of his private emptiness. It's a hand reaching into the locked room inside him. And that's where the magic of the movie begins, not in whether the child is, really, his, because the plot will certainly play with that tension, but in the fact that the word, dad, forces Jiang Nanyang to confront a version of himself he never planned to be. The movie is smart enough to make the reunion messy. It doesn't romanticize the idea that destiny fixes everything. Destiny, here, is more like a spotlight. It shows you what you avoided. It shows you what you broke. It shows you what you owe. So we get these scenes where Chi Shu is clearly trying to keep control over the situation, over her emotions, over the narrative, because she has had to be the adult in her world for a long time, and the film paints her toughness as both admirable and tragic. She's not tough because she enjoys it, she's tough because tenderness, for her, has historically been punished. When the story flashes back or references that moment 6 years ago when she saved Jiang Nanyang, it doesn't frame it as a fairy tale meet cute, it frames it as an intersection of crisis and compassion. She didn't save him because she wanted a reward. She saved him because she couldn't not save him. And that one decision created an invisible thread that time couldn't sever, no matter how much distance they put between it. Then the present-day plot builds on that thread, the boy, the necklace, the sudden collision, the suspicion, the denial, the disbelief, the aching curiosity. One of the strongest spoiler-controlled pleasures of the film is watching how it makes you question everyone's motivations without turning them into villains. Chi Shu isn't hiding things because she's malicious, she's hiding things because she's scared. Jiang Nanyang isn't pushing because he's entitled, he's pushing because he's disoriented, because something is telling him his life might not be as self-authored as he believed. And the child, this little catalyst, feels like the purest emotional instrument in the narrative, not because he's a plot device, but because children in stories like this represent honesty. Adults lie with words. Kids tell the truth with instincts. That's why the necklace matters. A child doesn't care about corporate hierarchies or social consequences. He recognizes something. And he claims it. He points at a piece of the past and says, "That belongs to me, that belongs to us." And suddenly the adults have to catch up to the truth a kid already reached. Now, in terms of background and release details, 2025 has been a year where cross-cultural melodramas and romantic family dramas have been finding wider audiences online, especially through streaming and viral clips, and sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak Kita fits perfectly into that ecosystem because its premise is instantly shareable. Kid calls CEO dad after seeing Necklace, but its execution is what keeps you watching beyond the clips. The title itself, translated and carried in that dramatic cadence, promises a certain archetype, the tough woman returning with our child. That possessive our is doing a lot of work because it frames the whole narrative as a confrontation. This isn't just a woman asking for help. This is a woman bringing receipts. This is a woman arriving not to beg but to reveal, and in doing so, she forces a man to re-evaluate the meaning of responsibility, love, and timing. And the film's tone leans into that promise. It's glossy enough to feel cinematic and aspirational, but grounded enough to hurt, and that balance is crucial because melodrama without grounding becomes parody, and grounding without style becomes mundane. Here, the filmmakers aim for a heightened emotional reality where feelings are bigger than life, yet still recognizably human. Let's get into character impressions, because that's where this movie either wins you or loses you. And for me it wins, largely because Chi Shu is written with a kind of spine you don't often see handled well in romance-driven stories. Tough female leads can sometimes be reduced to surface-level, strong traits, sharp tongue, ice-cold demeanor, independence as a badge, but Chi Shu's toughness feels expensive. It feels like it cost her something. You see it in how she anticipates judgment before it arrives. You see it in how she keeps her body positioned between her son and the world like she's been doing it for years. You see it in how she measures her words around Jiang Nanyang, not because she's intimidated by him as a man, but because she's wary of the power he represents, power that could disrupt her child's life, power that could rewrite her story without her consent. And then Jiang Nanyang, again, a CEO character is always at risk of being a stereotype, but the performance and the script give him something more vulnerable. He's a man who has been in control for so long that he doesn't know how to behave in a situation where control is meaningless. You can't negotiate your way into being a father. You can't sign a contract and retroactively be there for someone's childhood. You can't buy back time. So the story's tension isn't just romantic, it's existential. It's about identity. It's about whether Jiang Nanyang can become someone worthy of the word the child casually gave him. And the film cleverly avoids making him instantly paternal or instantly redeemed. It makes him awkward. It makes him defensive. It makes him curious in a way that scares him. There are moments where you can tell he wants the truth not just because he suspects a connection, but because he wants permission to hope for something outside his sterile corporate identity. That's a dangerous desire. Hope can ruin you. Hope can make you reckless. And the film uses that, shows how Jiang Nanyang's pursuit of answers starts to interfere with his life in ways that aren't conveniently glamorous. It disrupts his schedule, yes, but more importantly it disrupts his emotional order. Meanwhile, the child character, often a risky element because child actors can either melt the audience or pull them out of the story, here functions as a quiet heartbeat. The boy's presence changes the rhythm of scenes. Even when adults are tense, his innocence reshapes the air. He's not written as unrealistically wise, which is good, instead, he's written as observant and emotionally direct, and that's far more believable. He asks questions kids would ask. He reacts to tension like a kid would, sometimes with confusion, sometimes with sudden affection, sometimes with stubbornness. And because of that, when he reaches for Jiang Nanyang, when he says, "Dad," it lands not as manipulation but as instinctive attachment to an image or memory he doesn't fully understand. The necklace becomes this bridge between generations. Now, the cinematic and emotional analysis is where Wanita Tang really starts to glow, because it understands how to shoot longing. There are certain close-ups that feel like they're not just capturing a face, but capturing a decision being made in real time. The camera loves pauses. It loves that moment right before someone speaks, when you can see them choosing whether to tell the truth. The lighting in the corporate spaces is often cool, reflective, and controlled, glass walls, polished surfaces, a world where everything is visible but nothing is truly seen, while the scenes around Chi-Shu's life tend to feel warmer and more textured, more lived in, less perfect, which is a classic visual contrast but still effective because it reinforces the emotional divide between them. And when these worlds intersect, when Jiang Nanyang steps into her space, or when she's forced into his, there's a visible discomfort, like the film is physically showing you that their realities were never meant to overlap again, except fate has other plans. The music, when it's used well, doesn't drown you in sadness, it tugs gently, giving scenes room to breathe. And that breathing room matters because the most devastating moments in this film aren't screams, they are contained. They are the quiet after a question that doesn't get answered. They are the look Chi-Shu gives when she's trying to be strong and fails for just half a second. They are the way Jiang Nanyang watches the child when he thinks no one is looking, as if he's trying to memorize something he's terrified he doesn't deserve. That's the emotional language of the movie: observation, hesitation, restraint, then finally release. Theme-wise, this story is basically built on the idea that love doesn't always arrive when you're ready, and responsibility doesn't always arrive with consent. There's a cultural resonance here too, because stories about CEOs and everyday women often reflect social fantasies and anxieties, class difference, power imbalance, the desire for security versus the desire for autonomy, but Wanita Tang adds the child element, which changes the moral math. It's no longer just about romance, it's about the consequences of romance, the aftermath that stories often skip. And that's where the titles, Tough Woman, becomes more than a trope. She is tough because she had to be the consequence manager of a relationship that may never have been officially acknowledged. The film circles around questions like, who gets to decide what family is? Is biology the claim, or is presence the claim? Can someone who wasn't there earn the right to be there now? And what about Chi-Shu? Does she want Jiang Nanyang in their lives, or does she simply accept that the truth has surfaced and now she has to navigate it? The film's pacing is generally patient, sometimes almost teasing, letting misunderstandings and near-confessions simmer. For some viewers, that can feel slow, but in a story like this, slowness is part of the emotional realism. People don't reveal their deepest wounds quickly, especially not when power dynamics are involved. Chi-Shu can't just trust him because he looks guilty or nostalgic. Jiang Nanyang can't just claim fatherhood because he feels a pull. The film gives space for suspicion. It gives space for testing. It gives space for small interactions to matter: a meal shared, A toy picked up, a small injury tended to, a moment of jealousy that isn't romantic jealousy but existential jealousy, jealousy over lost years. One of the most affecting undercurrents is the idea of time as a thief. 6 years is a long time in a child's life. 6 years is a long time to carry a secret alone. And when the movie reminds you of that, through lines, through flashback hints, through the way Chishu reacts to certain triggers, you start to understand that the real antagonist here isn't a villain character, it's the past. It's the gap. It's what wasn't said. It's what wasn't done. Performances matter a lot in a film like this, because if the actors lean too hard into melodrama, it becomes soap, if they underplay too much, it becomes cold. The sweet spot is emotional truth with cinematic emphasis, and that's what the leads aim for. Chishu's actress sells strength as a posture, but also sells the cracks beneath it, and that duality is what keeps her sympathetic even when she makes choices that frustrate you. Because yes, there will be moments where you want her to just speak, just explain, just stop protecting everyone from reality, but the film makes you feel why she can't. Trauma teaches you that the truth can be weaponized against you. Motherhood teaches you that you can't gamble with your child's stability. So she moves like someone who has calculated the risk of every emotion she shows. Jiang Nanyan's actor, meanwhile, plays control as a habit, but you can see that habit failing, and it's strangely compelling to watch a powerful man become emotionally powerless. He's not helpless in a pathetic way, he's helpless in a human way. The child opens a door in him that he didn't know existed, and now he can't close it. That's what makes his arc interesting, not whether he can get the girl, but whether he can become the kind of person who can share a life instead of owning one. Now, I want to talk about the way the film handles the necklace motif, because it's easy for symbolic objects to become cheesy, but here it works because the necklace isn't just symbolic, it's practical evidence and emotional memory at once. It's something that can be recognized, questioned, claimed. It's something that can belong to someone, be given, be lost, be found. When the child recognizes it, it suggests that the necklace has been present in his life, which implies stories told at bedtime, implied connections, the mother's lingering attachment, or at least her inability to fully bury that chapter. So the necklace isn't just a romantic token, it's a thread of continuity. And continuity is what the characters lack. Chishu's life has continuity with her child but not with her past love. Jiang Nanyan's life has continuity with his career but not with his emotional history. The necklace stitches these discontinuities together in the simplest way: it exists. It survived. It's still here. Just like the feelings. Just like the consequences. Just like the people. And when the film returns to that object at key moments, it doesn't feel repetitive, it feels like a heartbeat. Each time it appears, something new is forced to the surface. The romance itself is layered with bitterness and tenderness. There's an ache in their interactions because they are not two strangers falling in love, they are two people reapproaching something unfinished, something that might have been love, might have been a moment, might have been a lifeline, and now it's complicated by the presence of a child who didn't ask to be born into ambiguity. The film is careful to show that the child is not a relationship fixer. If anything, the child makes everything harder, because now every adult decision has stakes. That's a mature choice for a melodrama. Too often, these stories use a child as a cute shortcut to bonding, but here, bonding comes with fear. Bonding comes with grief. Because if Jiang Nanyang starts to love this child and then loses him, through legal battles, misunderstandings, separation, that loss would be catastrophic. So there's a tension in his growing attachment. He wants to reach out, but he's terrified of being rejected, terrified of discovering he has no claim, terrified of learning that the child's dad was a child's mistake. And Chishu is watching all of this with a kind of guarded pain, because she has lived 6 years without him, which means she has practiced absence until it became normal, and now his presence threatens to destabilize everything she built. There's a specific emotional cruelty in that. When someone returns after you've learned to survive without them, their return forces you to remember what you had to kill inside yourself to keep going. That's the film's emotional core. Not just love, but survival. And the title's toughness isn't glamorous, it's grief in armor. Let's touch on the pacing and structure more, because a 2025 release like this is likely designed to keep binge watchers and clip watchers engaged, and the film uses mini cliffhanger reveals and emotional peaks that feel episodic even if it's presented as a single feature. The narrative keeps moving by alternating between external conflict and internal conflict, a confrontation in a public place followed by a quiet scene at home, a corporate pressure sequence followed by a tender moment with the child, a misunderstanding followed by a small act of care that rebuilds trust. That rhythm is what keeps the story from feeling like it's just two people talking in rooms. And the dialogue, when it's good, plays with subtext. People say one thing and mean another. They ask about the necklace when they are really asking about the past. They talk about responsibility when they are really talking about love. The best scenes are the ones where the characters are forced to interact in ways that bypass their defenses, Jiang Nanyang caring for the child in a small practical situation, Chishu seeing him not as a CEO but as a man trying and failing and trying again, the child acting as a mirror that reflects each adult's weaknesses. In those moments, you feel the film's sincerity. It's not trying to be edgy. It's trying to be honest about how hard it is to trust someone with your life when they once disappeared from it, whether by choice or circumstance. Now, audience reaction and cultural impact. This is where Sang Wanita Tang is likely to have a strong footprint, because stories about hidden children and reunited lovers always ignite conversation. But in 2025 the conversation is sharper, viewers are more critical about consent, power imbalance, and maternal sacrifice narratives. And the film invites those debates because it doesn't present a simple moral. Some viewers will side with Chishu completely. She protected her child, she maintained stability, she doesn't owe a powerful man access just because of biology. Others will sympathize with Jiang Nanyang. If he truly didn't know, if he was robbed of the chance to be present, isn't that also a tragedy? The film thrives in that gray zone. It asks you to consider that two people can both be hurt and still hurt each other. It also taps into a cultural fascination with CEOs as romantic leads, men who have everything except warmth, and uses that to explore how wealth can't solve emotional debt. I can already imagine clips circulating, the child's dad moment, the necklace close-up, Jiang Nanyang's stunned face, Chishu's protective stance, the first time the child reaches for his hand, the first time Chishu's voice breaks, the first time Jiang Nanyang drops his CEO mask in a room where no one can see him. Those moments travel well online because they're instantly understandable, but what gives them weight is the build-up. And that's what I appreciate. The film doesn't just deliver moments, it earns them through emotional continuity. Even when it leans into melodrama, it tends to keep its characters psychologically consistent. Chishu doesn't suddenly become soft because the plot needs it. Jiang Nanyang doesn't suddenly become perfect because the romance needs it. They evolve in increments, sometimes messy ones. Now, do I think the story uses familiar tropes? Absolutely. The long-lost connection, the powerful man, the strong single mother, the child as fate's messenger, the symbolic object that triggers memory, these are classic ingredients. But ingredients aren't the meal. Execution is the meal. And the execution here is what makes it satisfying, the emotional sincerity, the slow burn tension, the emphasis on consequence rather than fantasy. The cinematography supports the emotional arc rather than overpowering it. The music steps in at the right times. The script understands that silence can be louder than dialogue. And crucially, the film recognizes the mother's point of view as more than an obstacle to romance, it treats her as the axis of the story. She isn't just the woman. She's the one who carried time. She's the one who carried a child. She's the one who carried memory. That's why the title centers her toughness. And that toughness is tested not just by external threats but by the internal temptation to finally exhale, to finally share the burden of parenthood, to finally be seen by someone who once mattered. But letting someone in is terrifying when you've built your life on not needing anyone. The film's emotional best is when it captures that paradox, the desire for connection and the fear of it. Let's bring this home with a final emotional verdict, because Sang Wanita Tang Datang Membawa Anak Kita isn't trying to reinvent cinema, it's trying to tell a story that makes your heart do that sinking, swelling thing, the thing you feel when you watch two people stand on opposite sides of a truth they can't avoid anymore. It's a fate-driven reunion tale, yes, but it's also a meditation on time, responsibility, and the quiet violence of unanswered questions. If you're looking for a story that moves fast and resolves clean, this might frustrate you, because it wants you to sit in discomfort, it wants you to feel the weight of 6 missing years, it wants you to understand that love isn't just chemistry, it's accountability. But if you're the kind of viewer who lives for slow-burn emotional payoffs, for characters who look like they're holding back tears they refuse to waste, for a narrative that uses a child not as a gimmick but as a moral mirror, then this film hits hard. It reminds you that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried, not because it's dramatic, but because it's unfinished, and when a child looks at a man and says, "Dad," the universe is basically asking one question: are you going to run from what you are, or are you going to become it? And maybe that's why the story lingers after the credits, because it's not only about whether Chi Shu and Jiang Nanyang can reconnect, it's about whether any of us can face the parts of our lives that we left behind and still choose to show up, fully, without excuses, without titles, without power, just as a person trying to earn a place in someone else's world. Imagine walking through a crowded city mall on a rainy afternoon, the kind of place where every sound bounces off the glass, where announcements blend with footsteps, and you're half lost in your own thoughts, when suddenly a small voice cuts through all that noise like a lightning bolt and a little boy tugs at the sleeve of a stranger in a suit and calls him one word that can change lives forever: Dad. That is the emotional trigger that sits at the beating heart of this new 2025 drama film, Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak Kita, a title that in English roughly means, "The strong woman came bringing our child." And this is the kind of film that takes a single impossible moment like that and unwraps it over 2 hours into a story about fate, sacrifice, motherhood, and the terrifying, beautiful mess of second chances. And as I watched it, I kept thinking, this is what happens when the small random acts we forget become the defining scars someone else carries for the rest of their life. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel Bongo Gaming, and let us know where you are listening from in the comments. Now, I know what you might be thinking: what is a channel with gaming in the name doing, talking about an emotional romantic drama about a strong woman and a cold CEO and a 6-year-old kid with too much courage for his own good? But storytelling is storytelling, whether it's in a game, a series, or a movie, and this particular film grabbed me by the collar and did not let go. And if you've ever been pulled into those Chinese and Asian modern dramas where one chance meeting spirals out into years of heartbreak and healing, you're going to feel right at home here. Yet, Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak Kita adds enough nuance and emotional grounding that it doesn't just feel like another entry in the rich guy, poor girl, secret baby playbook. It feels like someone sat down and said, what if we took that trope and actually pushed it to its emotional limit? What if we asked, what does it cost a woman to be Tang, to be strong in a world that only seems to notice her when she breaks? So, here's the setup without getting too spoiler heavy at first. 6 years before the events of the film, a young woman named Chi Shu is working the kind of late-night shift that has you counting coins in your head, exhausted, hungry, but still moving forward because there is no safety net behind you, and she ends up in the middle of an incident that changes her life, the night she saves the life of Jiang Nanyang, a powerful, icy, emotionally shut down CEO who at that time is more rumor than human. Being to most people, a name attached to skyscrapers and headlines and stock charts, not a person you'd expect to see bleeding in a back alley behind a hotel. The film opens not with glossy boardrooms but with rain, lots of rain, the camera following the water running down neon-lit pavement as Chi Shu hurries under a worn-out umbrella, and it's such a deliberate contrast, her cheap shoes splashing through dirty puddles, while just a few blocks away, Jiang Nanyang is stepping out of a black car into a world of glass and marble, security guards, and expensive watches, and yet, through a series of quick, escalating shots, both of their paths bend into each other because fate in this film isn't loud at first, it's subtle. It's the way the lights flicker, the way an elevator stalls, the way a business meeting runs late so that a powerful man ends up walking alone down a side street just when a desperate mugger chooses the wrong target. The actual saving moment is done in a surprisingly grounded way. There's no over-choreographed fight scene. It's messy and clumsy and a little bit pathetic, as real violence usually is, and Chi Shu doesn't suddenly become an action hero. She's terrified, she's shaking, but she's the one who steps in when everyone else looks away, and that choice, that split-second instinct to help someone who will probably never even remember her name, becomes the fulcrum of her life. In the chaos, amidst the shouts and the struggle, there's this small visual detail. As Jiang Nanyang stumbles, his hand catches on a chain around his neck, a simple, understated necklace, unusual only because it feels too personal for someone whose every accessory looks like part of a corporate brand, and when Chishu drags him out of immediate danger and fumbles with her cheap first aid kit, there's a brief, unspoken moment of connection over that necklace, almost like the camera is whispering. Remember this. He's half-conscious, his usual armor of control and arrogance stripped away by fear and blood loss, and he does something he might never do in daylight. He takes the necklace off, presses it into her palm with unsteady fingers, and mutters something like, "If I don't make it, let this be a thank you," thinking he's not going to wake up again. That necklace, that one small object, becomes the thread the entire story wraps around. Of course, he does wake up, but when he does, everything is chaos. His people tell him it was his security team, or the police, or just luck that saved him. Nobody even bothers to mention a stranger girl in a cheap raincoat, and Jiang Nanyang, who has spent his whole life believing that if you want something done right you either do it yourself or you pay for the best, never learns her name. On the other side of town, Chishu is left with trembling hands, bruises, and a necklace that does not belong in her world, a small, shining piece of metal that feels heavy with a meaning she can't quite define. The film then skips ahead, through one of those elegant time-lapse sequences where the city cycles through seasons, buildings rise, lights change, lives go on, and for most people, that night would have been a strange, scary memory, something to tell in hushed voices on bad days, but for Chishu, the consequences keep rippling, because sometime shortly after that night, her life took another unexpected turn, and when the story picks up again 6 years later, she's no longer the terrified girl in the rain but a single mother raising a quick-witted, endlessly curious little boy, a boy who looks at the world like every question has an answer if you just keep asking it. His name depends on whether you're looking at the official documents or the way his mother calls him. Officially, he's Chi Nuo, but to her he's Xiao Nuo, little promise, the silent vow she made to protect him no matter what. By the time we meet them in the present, their bond is already so lived in that you believe it instantly. The way she double-checks his backpack, the way he complains but still turns back for one last hug before running off, the way she's clearly tired but never lets that stop her from kneeling to his level when he's upset, all those tiny expressions of love that the camera lingers on without milking it too hard. And this is where the film's central hook pays off. Chishu and Xiao Nuo end up at a crowded upscale mall because of something so ordinary it hurts, a kids contest he's excited about, the promise of a rare day where she finally has a little bit of time to just be a mom and not a warrior against bills and deadlines, and in that mall, in a scene that starts out almost comedic, Xiao Nuo gets separated from her for a moment, because of course he does. This is cinema, but the way it happens feels so real, a balloon, a colorful display, a distraction, a small hand slipping away in a crowd. He wanders, looking around with that combination of fear and stubborn independence kids have, and then he sees it, a necklace, hanging at the chest of a man standing in front of an expensive store, arguing into his phone, his expression hard and closed, radiating that don't come near me energy successful people sometimes wear like armor. It's the same pendant. The same shape, the same old scratch on the side, reflected in the glass. And this little boy, who has seen that exact necklace every day of his life, because his mother keeps it in a little jewelry box and sometimes, when she thinks he's asleep, she takes it out and stares at it with an expression that is part regret, part longing, part unresolved pain, does the only thing that makes sense in his world. He walks up to this stranger and, with the blind courage of a child who has never yet been truly betrayed, he calls him, "Arya. Dad." The entire crowded soundscape falls away in that moment. The sound design goes almost muffled, like you're hearing the world from inside the characters' heads, and the camera alternates between the boy's hopeful eyes and Jiang Nanyan's stunned, confused face, because yes, of course, this stranger with the necklace is Jiang Nanyang himself, now even more successful, even more tightly wound, the same man whose life was once saved by a girl whose face he never fully remembers. He hears that word, Dad, and you see something flicker behind his eyes, not recognition but some old buried hurt, because this man is not just a villainous cold CEO archetype, he's someone who has his own complicated history with family, with a father who was present in body but not in warmth, with expectations that felt more like shackles than support. So when a small boy, out of nowhere, claims him as Arya, it hits something raw. At first, he reacts the way you'd expect. He thinks it's a mistake, a misunderstanding. He pushes the kid away verbally, not harshly, but coldly, telling him he's got the wrong person, that he shouldn't joke about things like that. But Xiao Nuo is not easily discouraged. He clings to the certainty that the necklace is the proof he's been looking for, because in his mind, that necklace was always Dad's, the silent stand-in for a man he's never met, and he demands answers with the blunt honesty only a child can get away with. Meanwhile, in the middle of this unfolding emotional minefield, here comes Chishu, breathless, panicked, scanning the crowd for her son, and when her gaze lands on him clutching the sleeve of this stranger, and then higher, up to that face she has tried for 6 years not to imagine, and then finally to the glint of a necklace she once gripped in her own hand in a dark alley. It's like the universe has decided to log back in all the unfinished business she thought she had escaped. Their reunion is not some slow-motion, romantic score kind of moment, it's awkward, tense, the air thick with unsaid words. She pulls her son back, apologizes quickly, trying to extract them from the situation before it escalates, but Jiang Nanyang, who is trying to figure out why this child looks at him like destiny and why this woman looks at him like a ghost, doesn't let them leave so easily. That's the inciting incident, and from there, the film unspools into this intense dance between three people bound together by secrets and coincidences, trying to decide whether to accept the ties of blood and history or cut them clean. Now, before I dive deeper into the plot, let me say this, I'll keep the early part of this review mostly spoiler light, focusing on performances, setup, and themes, and then slowly move into heavier territory where I'll talk about what really worked for me emotionally in the latter half and how the story resolves. So if you're the kind of viewer who wants to go in knowing almost nothing, I'll give you a verbal warning before I cross that line. But honestly, even if you know the skeleton of the story, the real power here is not in the plot twists, it's in the way those moments land emotionally, in the quiet glances, the trembling hands, the long silences between people who want to speak but don't know how. In terms of background, Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak Kita is very clearly drawing from a lineage of Asian drama storytelling that has exploded in popularity online over the last decade. The cold but secretly wounded CEO, the resilient, hardworking woman, the secret child or the fated connection. But what separates this film from a typical long-format series is its discipline. This is a self-contained movie, not a 40-episode drama, so the script is forced to choose. Every scene has to carry multiple weights at once. Directed by a filmmaker who clearly has a soft spot for melodrama but a sharp eye for human detail, the movie doesn't waste much time once the main trio is in the same breathing space. A lot of these types of stories lean heavily on over-the-top villains and misunderstandings that could be solved with one honest conversation. Here, to the film's credit, while misunderstandings do exist, the core tension is less about nonsensical secrets and more about fear, pride, and the very real question of what is best for the child caught in the middle. From an acting standpoint, the performances carry so much of the film's weight that even when the script veers dangerously close to cliché, the characters keep it grounded. The actress playing Chi Shu brings a softness to her strength that makes the tang in the title feel earned. She's not written as some flawless superwoman who can do everything without breaking a sweat. She's exhausted, she's occasionally snappy, she makes mistakes, but you always feel the love anchoring her every decision. In quieter scenes, when the camera lingers on her face as she watches her son sleep or rehearses in the mirror how she might one day explain the truth about his father, there's this palpable vulnerability that makes it impossible not to root for her. And Jiang Nanyang, as portrayed here, isn't just a cardboard cutout of the traditional frosty CEO either. Yes, he starts out emotionally distant, hyper-controlled, obsessed with efficiency, but the film takes its time showing the cracks in that armor. We get glimpses of his childhood, fragmented flashbacks of a stern father who treated warmth as weakness, the empty echo of a mansion where luxury replaced genuine connection, and those memories inform everything: his distrust of sudden emotion, his instinct to manage relationships like business deals, his habit of keeping everyone at arm's length. So when this possibility bursts into his life that he might actually have a son he never knew, it doesn't turn him into an instantly transformed softie. Instead, it scrambles all his internal wiring. He tries to handle it like any other problem, gather information, control the narrative, secure his position. But you can't negotiate with a kid who just wants to know whether you'll show up to his school play. And speaking of the kid, the child actor playing Xiao Nuo is honestly one of the film's secret weapons. It is so easy for child characters in melodramas to fall into two traps, being either unrealistically precocious, basically tiny adults delivering punchy lines, or overly cutesy plot devices whose main job is to be adorable and wheeled out whenever the mood dips. Here, to my relief, Xiao Nuo feels like a real child. He is clever, yes, but in a way that feels earned. You understand that being raised by a single mother who is often juggling multiple jobs has taught him to be observant, to grow up a little faster, to read moods in the room, but he still throws tantrums, mispronounces big words, and asks the kind of brutally straightforward questions that can slice right through adult armor. His relationship with his mom is the emotional baseline of the film, so when Jiang Nanyang enters that space, we, as the audience, are automatically protective. We've seen too many dramas where the charismatic father swoops in and suddenly the kid favors him over the mother who sacrificed everything, and while the film flirts with that dynamic, it also constantly reminds us of who has been there, day after day, wiping noses, cooking noodles, staying up late over homework. That's what makes some of the later scenes, where Xiao Nuo is torn between the warmth he's starting to feel for this mysterious man and the fierce loyalty he has for his mother, so heartbreakingly believable. Now, on the cinematic side, there's a really interesting contrast at work. The director uses space and color to mirror the emotional states of the characters. Jiang Nanyang's world is all sleek, cool tones, glass offices, and symmetrical lines. Everything about his environment screams control, predictability, efficiency, while Qi Shu's world is warmer but also more cluttered, full of mismatched furniture, soft fabrics, half-finished art projects from her son, and the chaos of real life lived on a budget. When the two worlds start to overlap, you can literally see it in the visuals. His pristine office gets invaded by a stray toy car left on the desk, a kid's drawing taped crookedly on a glass wall, a coffee stain that never quite washes out. It's subtle, but it's there, and it visually tracks the emotional mess he's letting into his life. The music score leans heavily on piano and strings, as you'd expect from a melodrama, but it's not constantly blaring in your face. Some of the most effective scenes are the quietest, where the soundtrack falls away and you're left with just the sounds of breathing, a chair creaking, a hesitant hand knocking on a door. One thing I particularly appreciated is how the movie handles its big emotional confrontations. Instead of going straight for screaming matches, it often allows the anger to simmer under words that look polite on paper. There's a standout early confrontation between Jiang Nanyang and Qi Shu in a coffee shop, where he has finally tracked her down after running a background check, because of course he does. The man is a CEO, he weaponizes information, and he bluntly asks whether Xiao Nuo is his son. The camera does this interesting thing where it sits slightly behind Qi Shu's shoulder, so we see him across from her, blurred slightly by the steam of a coffee cup, like he's not fully real yet in this part of her life. She doesn't answer right away. Instead, she counters with questions of her own. Why does it matter to him now? What does he think fatherhood is? Is it just a name on a birth certificate, a shared bloodline, or is it all the work he never had to do? The way she raises her chin just a fraction, the way her fingers tremble around the cup even as her voice stays level, tells you everything about the last 6 years without a single flashback. Eventually, she confirms the truth, but not as an admission of guilt, more as a statement of fact. Yes, he is your son, and no, you don't get to decide that this suddenly gives you control over us. That's the core conflict. Jiang Nanyang, used to having the world rearrange itself around his decisions, is confronted with the reality that there are 6 years of birthdays, hospital visits, scraped knees, and lullabies that he never touched, and the film doesn't pretend that he can make up for that with one grand gesture. Instead, it asks a more painful, more honest question: what does it actually look like, step by step, for a man like that to try to become a father? And this is where the pacing of the film really comes into play. It could easily have rushed through this, fast-tracking his transformation to hit the usual romantic beats, but to its credit, it slows down. We get scenes of him awkwardly trying to connect with Xiao Nuo, failing, overcompensating by buying expensive toys the kid doesn't really want, misreading cues, showing up at school in a way that embarrasses the boy more than impresses him. We see him struggle with jealousy when he realizes that no matter how many gifts he brings, only Qi Shu's presence can truly soothe the child when he has a nightmare. We see him sitting in his car outside their modest apartment, debating whether to ring the bell or leave them alone. Each of these small moments chips away at his image as an untouchable CEO and reframes him as a man inching his way, painfully and awkwardly, into a role he was never prepared for. At the same time, the film does not let Qi Shu off the hook completely either, and that's important. She made the choice not to tell him about the pregnancy, and while we as the audience understand why, the power imbalance, the fear of being trapped in his world, the trauma of that chaotic night, maybe even some manipulative interference from secondary characters that we discover later, the story still sits with the ethical weight of that decision. There are a few conversations where her close friend calls her out, gently but firmly, asking if perhaps holding on so tightly to her independence has cost her son something he never even had the chance to ask for. Those scenes hurt because they are written with empathy. They don't paint her as selfish or villainous, but they do acknowledge that there are no clean choices when you're a single parent trying to protect your child in a world that is not built for you. Thematically, the movie is obsessed with one big question: what does it mean to call someone family, and who gets to decide that? Blood? Time? Sacrifice? Shared memories? There's a line Jiang Nanyang says at one point, in a moment of frustration, that stuck with me: if I had known about him from the start, I would have done my duty. And Chishu fires back, bitterly, my son doesn't need your duty, he needs your heart. That, in a single exchange, crystallizes their conflict. To him, everything is framed in terms of responsibility and obligation, like a contract. To her, it's about emotional presence and safety. For Xiao Nuo, caught between them, it's much simpler and much more complicated all at once. He just wants all the people he loves not to leave. As the story develops, secondary characters help flesh out the emotional stakes. Jiang Nanyang's mother, for instance, isn't the typical controlling matriarch we often see in these stories. Instead, she's weary, regretful, someone who sees in Xiao Nuo a chance to do better than she did with her own son. Her scenes with Chishu are some of my favorites because they are layered with generational echoes: an older woman who once chose silence and compromise trying to understand this younger woman who has built an entire life out of refusing to bow. They don't immediately get along. Their first meeting is stiff, polite, with both of them testing the other's boundaries, but there's a poignancy when the grandmother quietly leaves a bag of groceries at Chishu's door, like a peace offering, not sure if it'll be accepted. On the flip side, we also have the inevitable antagonistic forces: a business rival who tries to use the sudden revelation of Jiang Nanyang's secret child as leverage, a former girlfriend or fiancé whose plans are derailed, but thankfully, the film resists turning them into cartoon villains. They serve the plot by raising external pressure, but the real battles are always internal, within this newfound, fragile trio trying to figure out whether they can be something like a family without destroying each other in the process. From a pacing perspective, there are moments in the middle stretch where you might feel the story wheel spinning a bit, as misunderstandings pile up, invitations are declined, visits are delayed, and you can start to think, okay, we get it, they are hesitant, move on. But then the film will hit you with a scene so emotionally precise that it pulls you right back in. One such scene happens around the midpoint, when Xiao Nuo gets sick. It's a classic melodrama device, the child's illness forcing the adults into the same space, but it's executed here with a level of emotional detail that overrides the cliché. In the sterile light of a hospital corridor, you see Jiang Nanyang pacing like a caged animal, helpless, the one place where his money and influence cannot instantly fix things, while Chishu sits beside her son's bed, exhaustion etched into every line of her body, but her hand never leaving his. When she finally steps out to get some air, they end up side by side on a bench, and there's this long, heavy silence before she quietly tells him about the first time their son had a fever as a baby, how she thought she was going to lose him, how she spent the night holding him and whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The camera stays tight on their faces, the background blurring into nothing, and in that moment, Jiang Nanyang gets a glimpse into the 6-year chapter of his own story that he was missing, and you can see the guilt washing over him, even though, rationally, it wasn't his fault, he didn't know. That's another thing the film does well: it acknowledges that sometimes guilt and responsibility don't line up neatly. You feel guilty even when you logically know you couldn't have done anything different, because your heart is slower to accept what your mind already understands. Now, let me talk about the chemistry between the leads, because in a story like this, if you don't buy into their connection, the entire structure collapses. Interestingly, Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak Kita doesn't start with fiery, flirtatious energy. There isn't the usual montage of bickering turning into banter. Their relationship is rooted in something much more solemn: shared trauma, unspoken gratitude, and a sense of what if that has festered for years. Only later, once they begin to actually spend time together in contexts that aren't immediately crisis-driven, do we start to see softer, lighter moments peeking through. There's a beautiful little sequence where the three of them, for the first time, go out together on what Xiao Nuo calls a family day, even though both adults are clearly uncomfortable with the label. They end up at an amusement park, because of course they do, and predictably, the boy runs from ride to ride while the parents trail behind, at first walking with this awkward distance between them, neither sure whether they should close it. Slowly, a thin thread of humor emerges. She teases him when he looks terrified on a roller coaster. He awkwardly buys matching hats because the vendor assumes they're a couple, and for a few hours, they are allowed to inhabit this alternate reality where the past isn't so sharp and the future isn't looming like a threat. The color palette in this sequence is brighter, warmer, the camera moves more fluidly, less rigidly composed than in their earlier confrontations, visualizing the loosening of their emotional armor. It's in scenes like this that the film really sells the idea that, under different circumstances, these two could have been one of those couples who meet, bicker, fall in love, and build a life together without the shadow of 6 missed years and a child they have to share. That sense of lost potential hangs over them like a ghost, and it gives their growing warmth an undercurrent of sadness that feels very adult. They are not two teenagers discovering love for the first time, they are two scarred people trying to decide whether to risk yet another wound. Now, from the audience perspective, especially those familiar with this genre, there's always the big question: are they going to end up together, as a couple, or is this story going to be more about co-parenting and separately healing? I won't spoil the exact final arrangement just yet, but I will say that the film walks a fine line between romantic fantasy and realistic compromise, and depending on your taste, you may find the ending either satisfying or slightly too neat. But along the way, it makes enough emotionally honest stops that I was willing to go where it led me. Let's shift a bit to the broader thematic analysis, because one of the things that struck me is how the title foregrounds the woman's strength, not the man's power. Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak centers Chi Shu's journey, even though Jiang Nanyang has the flashy CEO role. The narrative constantly circles back to what it means for her to have to walk into his world while trying not to lose herself. She's not just fighting him, she's fighting society's judgment, the whispers of neighbors who suddenly change how they look at her once they find out who the father is, the internalized fear that accepting help from him will erase all the years she spent proving she could do it on her own. There's a scene where her supervisor at work, having caught wind of her connection with this powerful man, starts treating her differently, assuming she'll quit soon, making snide comments about women like her who catch a rich man. It's infuriating, and the way the camera frames Chi Shu in that moment, slightly off-center, in a too tight space, makes you feel how trapped she is by other people's narratives about her life. That's one of the more quietly powerful things this film does. It shows how a woman's story constantly gets rewritten by society the moment a man enters the picture, especially a wealthy, influential one. Before, she was poor but hardworking, now she's opportunistic, or lucky, or a problem. And yet, the script refuses to let Jiang Nanyang be just a ticket out of poverty. Instead, he becomes a mirror in which she has to confront her own pride and fears. At the same time, we see how Jiang Nanyang's sense of masculinity and success is challenged. He has always believed that providing materially is the primary marker of a man's worth. Now he's faced with a situation where his money is, frankly, both useful and irrelevant. There's a moment where he shows up with a fancy private tutor he hired for Xiao Nuo, only to be confronted with the reality that what the boy actually needed that day was someone to watch his school performance, to clap from the back of the hall and say, "I'm proud of you," no matter how he did. You can see the lesson dawning on him slowly: you can't outsource presence. That realization hits even harder when contrasted with his own childhood, where his father thought exactly like he used to, equating success with sufficient care. In that sense, Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak is also, quietly, a story about breaking generational patterns. Jiang Nanyang's arc is not just about falling in love or coming to terms with an unexpected child, it's about deciding whether he will replicate his father's emotional absence or blaze a different trail. Meanwhile, Chi Shu's arc is about learning that accepting help does not erase her strength, that letting someone share the load does not make the years she carried it alone any less valid. These are complex, adult lessons, and the film doesn't always handle them with subtlety. Sometimes the dialogue spells out the theme a bit too directly, but the emotional truth behind them still lands. In terms of cultural impact, fictional as it may be framed here, you can imagine how a story like this would resonate with a lot of viewers, especially women who have had to be both mother and father, and children of divided households who have complex feelings about absent parents suddenly reappearing. The online discourse, within the context of this film's universe, would likely be full of debates. Did Qishu do the right thing by not telling Jiang Nanyang about the child initially, given the power imbalance and her situation, or did she rob her son of a father he deserved to know? Was Jiang Nanyang's persistent pursuit of parental rights an act of genuine care or an extension of his need to control everything in his orbit? The film does something interesting by not giving you an easy answer. It shows you the pain on all sides. There's a courtroom sequence later on, which I won't go into too much detail about yet, where issues of custody and legal rights are brought to the forefront, and it's one of the most thematically dense parts of the film. Instead of painting the legal system itself as the villain, it shows how laws can only see so much. They can count financial capacity, living conditions, official records, but they can't measure lullabies or the way a child unconsciously reaches for the person they trust when they are half asleep. And the film makes a point that whatever the outcome of such battles on paper, the real test of family happens in kitchens and bedrooms, in everyday routines and crises, not on official documents. From a purely technical perspective, the direction in that courtroom sequence cleverly underlines this by frequently cutting away from the formal proceedings to tight shots of Xiao Nuo waiting outside, swinging his legs, playing with a toy truck, not fully understanding that his future is being debated a few doors away. It's a reminder that while adults argue, children are just trying to live. Adding another layer, the film sprinkles in small, almost throwaway scenes that comment on class and privilege without turning into a lecture. For instance, after the media discovers Jiang Nanyang's secret son, paparazzi swarm Qishu's neighborhood, and suddenly, neighbors who never cared about her now either envy or resent her. Gossip travels fast, some say she trapped him, others romanticize her as some Cinderella figure. Neither narrative is true, and that dissonance between who she is and how people see her becomes another burden she has to carry. The script doesn't dwell on it extensively, but those touches make the world feel lived in and recognizable. How quickly people will rewrite your story to fit their own entertainment. Meanwhile, on the gaming and fandom side, since we are, after all, watching and discussing this on a channel called Bongo Gaming, I can easily imagine fan edits popping up online focusing on the softer scenes between father and son, or intense discussion threads dissecting every glance between Qishu and Jiang Nanyang, shipping them hard or arguing that Qishu deserves someone better, someone without all the baggage. That, to me, is a sign that the characters feel three-dimensional enough that different viewers can project their own hopes and frustrations onto them. Now, I want to move into more spoiler-heavy territory to talk about the film's final act and why it left me sitting through the credits in that stunned, slightly hollow way you only get when a story has sunk deeper into you than you expected. So consider this your warning. Beyond this point, I'll be talking about how the main conflicts resolve, key scenes in the last third, and the ending itself. If you want to watch the film fresh, this might be the place to pause, add it to your watch list, and then come back later. Alright. So in the final stretch, the film escalates both the external and internal stakes, and it does so by forcing a choice that, in some ways, was inevitable from the start. Will this makeshift family try to truly unite, or will they fracture into a sort of uneasy, distanced truce? The catalyst comes, unsurprisingly, from outside. Jiang Nanyang's business rival, who has been circling like a shark, manipulates the media leak about the child, throwing both Jiang Nanyang's company and Qishu's quiet life into chaos. In the fallout, board members question Jiang's judgment, his supposed personal scandal becomes a leverage point in corporate power plays, and someone suggests, in a chillingly pragmatic way, that distancing himself publicly from the child and the mother might be, for the good of the company. The old Jiang Nanyang, the one who believed the company's survival justified any personal sacrifice, might have at least considered it. But the man we see now has been changed by afternoons at the park, homework sessions, and hospital corridors. Instead of coldly strategizing, he reacts emotionally, which, in his world, is dangerous. He refuses to disown them, and that defiance costs him dearly. Meanwhile, Qishu, watching all this unfold, is torn. She never wanted this for her son, the paparazzi, the spotlight, the online hate and idolization. In one devastating scene, Xiao Nuo, having just been bullied at school by kids repeating rumors their parents saw online, asks her if it's his fault that everyone is angry, if he did something wrong by wanting a dad. She has to hold it together, smile through her tears, and tell him that none of this is his fault, that adults make messy choices, and children should never have to carry the blame. That moment might be one of the purest crystallizations of the film's emotional thesis. Children are so quick to assume that they are the problem when all they've done is exist. In response to the chaos, Chi-shu makes what she believes is the only rational choice. She decides to leave. Not out of spite or melodramatic noble idiocy, though viewers who hate the "I'll leave so you can be free" trope might initially see it that way, but out of a desperate attempt to give Xiao Nuo a quieter life again. She arranges a job in another city, one that pays modestly but promises anonymity, and she prepares to pull the plug on this entire messy, painful connection, even though her heart is clearly already entangled. The way the film handles her preparations is subtle and painfully intimate, packing toys into boxes, sorting through drawings where her son has, without her knowing, started including 3 stick figures instead of 2, hesitating over the necklace, unsure whether to take it or leave it behind. She writes a letter to Jiang Nanyang, because of course there's a letter. Sometimes only distance and ink allow you to say things face to face would render impossible, explaining her decision, thanking him for the ways he's already changed and shown up, but insisting that the cost of their connection has become too high for a child who didn't choose any of this. When Jiang Nanyang discovers their plan to leave, it's one of the few times we see him completely lose his composure. He rushes to their apartment, the camera hurrying after him down stairwells and hallways, the score swelling, and arrives just as the final box is being taped shut. That confrontation is the emotional peak of the film. Him, in his expensive suit, slightly wrinkled now, eyes wild, her, standing in the middle of a half-empty home, trying to look calm, trying to stay firm. He accuses her of running away. She counters that he's trying to chain them to his world without understanding what it feels like. He throws out raw, half-formed accusations, that she never gave him a chance from the start, that she decided unilaterally what kind of father he would be and then made that judgment true by shutting him out. She fires back her own bitterness, that when she was terrified and pregnant, when she needed support the most, he was unreachable, not because he didn't want to be but because their worlds were so far apart that she couldn't even imagine walking into his office and saying, "By the way, I might be carrying your child." The argument isn't neatly resolved, because no single conversation can untangle 6 years of false assumptions and hurt. But the key moment comes when Xiao Nuo, who has been listening from the doorway, steps in, crying, and says he doesn't want to choose. He doesn't want to be the reason they hurt each other, he just wants to stay with his mom and still see his dad. That child's plea slices through all their adult justifications, leaving them both shaken. In that instant, the film forces them, and us, to confront the uncomfortable reality. Adults often turn their own unresolved pain into these dramatic, binary choices, but for children, love is not a zero-sum game. The resolution that follows doesn't give everyone everything they want, but it feels like the most honest compromise possible in this world. Instead of one dramatic, all-or-nothing choice at the airport, as many dramas would go for, the film spans the ending across a few weeks. Chi-shu does move, at least temporarily, to the new city, taking Xiao Nuo with her, prioritizing stability and distance from the media circus. But this time, she doesn't cut Jiang Nanyang out. They agree, after far more conversations than we usually get glimpses of in stories like this, on a co-parenting arrangement that is messy, exhausting, but rooted in a shared desire not to repeat the mistakes of their own parents. We see Jiang Nanyang on long train rides, working on his laptop, then closing it to play guessing games with his son. We see him sitting awkwardly in Chi-shu's small new kitchen, helping wash dishes after dinner, clearly out of his element but trying. We see Chi-shu allowing herself to lean back against the counter for a moment, watching them, a mixture of sadness and hope in her eyes. The romantic question between them is answered more quietly. They don't jump straight into a full-blown relationship that would feel like fantasy after everything. Instead, the film's final gesture is one of open doors rather than closed chapters. In the last scene, sometime later, once the media storm has calmed and their new rhythm of shared parenting has settled, the three of them attend Xiao Nuo school event together. It's such an ordinary setting, a small auditorium, cheap decorations, parents fanning themselves with programs, but the ordinariness is the point. This is the future they are building, not glamorous, not headline-making, but steady. When Xiao Nuo's class finishes their performance, he looks out into the crowd, finds them, and the camera lingers on that moment, his smile widening when he sees both of them there, side by side. Afterwards, as they walk home in the golden light of late afternoon, Jiang Nanyang reaches out, almost without thinking, to take a shopping bag from Qishu's hand, and their fingers brush. They both pause, look at each other, and share a small, genuine smile. No big musical swell, no kiss under fireworks, just a sense that they are, finally, walking in the same direction. Some viewers will undoubtedly wish for a more explicitly romantic closure, a confession, a proposal, some tangible proof that they officially become a couple, but I actually appreciated this restraint. It leaves room for life to unfold beyond the credits, acknowledging that love, in the wake of so much complication, is a slow, continuous choice, not a single dramatic event. Stepping back from the plot, what stays with me about Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak kita is not just the big scenes, but the accumulation of tiny, human moments, the way Qishu closes her eyes and leans her head against a bus window after a long day, the way Jiang Nanyang's posture slowly softens when he listens instead of lectures, the way Xiao Nuo doodles little stick figures with necklaces as a symbol he doesn't even fully understand. This is a film that, for all its melodramatic trappings, genuinely cares about emotional truth. Now, it's not perfect. If we're being critical, the script sometimes leans too heavily on coincidence, like the convenient way certain documents are discovered at just the right time, or the slightly contrived circumstances that push key conversations into motion. There are also a few side characters who feel underdeveloped, a co-worker of Qishu who seems poised to be a more significant confidant but then fades into the background, a potential love interest introduced for a moment solely to stir up jealousy but never truly explored. The pacing, especially in the second act, wobbles a bit, with stretches that feel like repetitive emotional beats that could have been tightened without losing impact. But for me, those flaws are outweighed by the sincerity of the central performances and the specificity of its emotional insights. It's one thing to tell a story about a strong woman as a concept, it's another to show all the ways that strength can sometimes harden into loneliness, and then gently, patiently, allow that armor to crack in the presence of genuine support. It's one thing to depict a cold CEO, thawing under the influence of love, it's another to realistically portray the awkward, stumbling process of a man learning how to be emotionally available when he's never been taught how. In that sense, the film doesn't just replay familiar tropes, it interrogates them. It asks, what happens after the reunion, after the dramatic dad in the mall? What happens in the days when no one is watching, when the cameras are gone? Do they still show up? Do they still choose each other? I also found the recurring motif of the necklace handled with unexpected elegance. At the start, it's a symbol of fate, the physical link between a life saved and a life created. For Qishu, it's both a reminder of trauma and a talisman of hope. For Xiao Nuo, it's an imaginary father made tangible. For Jiang Nanyang, it's initially just an object he barely remembers parting with, then a clue, then a burden. But by the end of the film, the necklace has ceased to be necessary. In one quietly powerful scene near the conclusion, Xiao Nuo finds the necklace in the jewelry box where his mother keeps it and, instead of wearing it or asking about it, he carefully puts it into a small handmade envelope labeled, "For Dad," in childish handwriting, and gives it to Jiang Nanyang as a late birthday present. It's his way of returning the symbol to its original owner, but also of saying, we don't need this to prove who you are to me anymore. When Jiang opens the envelope later, alone, and the camera shows his expression, a flush of gratitude, regret, and acceptance, it signals that their connection has moved beyond luck and objects into something lived, something earned. That evolution of symbolism is the kind of detail that tells you someone behind the script was really thinking. So, who is this film for? If you're completely allergic to melodrama, to heightened emotions, to stories that wear their heart not just on their sleeve but on a flashing billboard, this might not convert you. There are definitely scenes where characters monologue about their feelings, where the music swells just a bit too obviously, where subtlety takes a backseat to sentiment. But if you have even a small soft spot for stories about imperfect adults trying, haltingly, to do better for the next generation than was done for them, if you can appreciate a performance where a single tear held back says more than a screaming match, if you find yourself drawn to narratives that center a woman's strength without punishing her for it in the end, then Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak is absolutely worth your time. It's the kind of film you might put on expecting background noise melodrama and then suddenly realize, halfway through, that you're leaning forward, eyes burning, because a line or a look hit too close to home. As someone who spends a lot of time immersed in stories, whether that's through games we play together here on Bongo Gaming, shows, or films, I'm always looking for those experiences that linger, that sneak up on you later when you're doing dishes or riding the bus. This film, for all its genre conventions, has that lingering quality. It makes you think about the people in your own life you might have misjudged based on incomplete information, the estranged family members, the single parents doing invisible heroics, the kids who have learned to be brave a little too early. In the end, my emotional verdict is this: Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak is not revolutionary cinema in terms of form or narrative innovation, but it is deeply, disarmingly human. It takes a setup that could have been pure cliché, woman saves CEO, secret child, dramatic reunion, and treats it with enough seriousness and compassion that the tropes become vehicles for something more. By the time the credits roll, you don't just remember the meet cute in the rain or the dramatic "Arya" in the mall, you remember the quieter decisions, the daily acts of love that slowly transform three isolated individuals into something resembling a family. And maybe that's the real power of stories like this: they remind us that fate might bring people into our lives through dramatic, improbable circumstances, but building a life with them afterwards is always going to be about the small, stubborn choice to stay, to show up, to listen, even when it's hard. So if you find yourself with an evening where you're ready to feel a little too much, to maybe see your own reflection in a strong woman who is tired of pretending she doesn't need anyone, or in a man who is just learning that vulnerability doesn't have to mean weakness, or in a child who simply wants the grown-ups to stop breaking each other in his name, then give this film a shot. Watch it, sit with it, and then come back here and tell me in the comments which moments hit you hardest, whether you agreed with the choices the characters made, and whether you think, in the end, Chishu and Jiang Nanyan's quietly shared smile under that ordinary sky is the beginning of a love story or simply the honorable, hard-won détente of two brave people choosing to co-parent with grace. Either way, Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak earns its place as one of those emotionally rich, conversation-starting dramas that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. That feeling of lingering resonance is precisely what elevates this film beyond the surface-level romance tropes it occasionally flirts with. It settles deep into the viewer's consciousness because it dares to explore the difficult aftermath of the inciting incident, the years of untangling that follow a single night that irrevocably altered the course of 3 lives, and I keep returning to that necklace, not just as a plot device, but as a metaphor for all the tiny, forgotten moments that carry the weight of future consequences, like seeds we plant without knowing they will sprout into giant, inconvenient trees in our adult lives. And as we look closer at the architecture of this narrative, the film consistently demonstrates a keen awareness of the subtle betrayals and quiet triumphs that define modern relationships, particularly when class and history are involved, forcing the characters into uncomfortable dialogues about ownership of the past, ownership of the child, and ultimately, ownership of their own futures. And this introspection is what makes those necessary filler scenes, those moments where they are just trying to figure out basic logistics, feel surprisingly profound, because logistics, when mixed with deep emotion, become agonizingly complex. Consider the early difficulty in establishing any sort of shared routine. Jiang Nanyang, who controls entire financial markets with a wave of his hand, finds himself utterly incompetent in the simple act of preparing a child's lunchbox, and the film dedicates surprising screen time to these small failures, showing him staring blankly into a refrigerator full of artisanal cheeses, unable to produce a single peanut butter sandwich, or trying to assemble a complicated toy that Xiao Nuo promptly ignores in favor of a worn-out stuffed animal his mother gave him. And it's in these moments that Chishu has to fight her own instincts, the urge to swoop in, fix it, and prove that she alone is capable, because to let him fail, even slightly, is to allow him the necessary space to learn what commitment actually entails beyond signing checks, and the directorial choice to often frame these interactions through the reflection in a window or the lens of a security camera in his high-tech apartment only emphasizes how artificial his attempts at connection feel compared to the organic, messy reality of Chishu's life. Furthermore, the film cleverly uses the theme of memory and perception to deepen the tension, exploring how the single night of the rescue is remembered so differently by each party. For Jiang Nanyang, it's a blur, a near-death experience where a single object was passed on in delirium, something he intellectually acknowledges but hasn't emotionally processed because he never knew the rescuer's identity, whereas for Chi-Shu, that night is crystallized, every sound, every smell, every shade of the lighting is etched into her memory because it was the moment her entire trajectory changed, the moment she conceived the life she would spend the next 6 years fiercely protecting alone, and the film allows us to feel that asymmetry of memory, that gap in their understanding of the shared event, which fuels so much of their later conflict because they are, in essence, arguing from entirely different histories that only intersect awkwardly in the present. The arrival of Xiao Nuo, then, is not just the arrival of a son, he is the physical, breathing manifestation of Chi-Shu's secret history, demanding that Jiang Nanyang acknowledge a past he didn't even know existed, and this forces him into a confrontation not just with Chi-Shu, but with his own younger self, the person who was perhaps too guarded, too proud, too focused on acquisition to notice the human element of his life that night. The cinematography supports this by utilizing color grading that shifts based on who is truly seeing whom. When Chi-Shu is observing Jiang Nanyang interact with Xiao Nuo, the palette often becomes warmer, suggesting acceptance or hope, but when Jiang Nanyang looks at Chi-Shu across a room, there's a tendency for the shot to introduce a harsh blue or a high-contrast shadow, reflecting his lingering confusion and inability to fully bridge the emotional distance she maintains, a distance rooted in justifiable self-preservation. As the narrative delves into the more serious fallout of the corporate espionage plot hinted at earlier, the film manages to weave those external threats seamlessly into the emotional core, avoiding the pitfall of having the business rival simply be a source of generic danger. Instead, the rival's tactical move, attempting to discredit Jiang Nanyang by exposing the unacknowledged, working-class mother and child, is designed specifically to play on Jiang Nanyang's deep-seated fear of appearing weak or uncontrolled in the eyes of his board, and his reaction to this external pressure reveals how much his priorities have shifted, demonstrating that the defense of his new, fragile family unit is now more important to him than the meticulous construction of his corporate image. Which is a massive character shift that the film earns through those small, awkward bonding scenes we discussed, the ones where he chose the park over the boardroom. When he stands up to the board, refusing to follow their advice to offer a large, silent settlement to Chi-Shu to make the problem disappear, his defense of her autonomy and the integrity of their situation speaks volumes more than any romantic declaration ever could, showing that his transformation is manifesting in actionable, character-defining choices, not just soft glances. And let's discuss the portrayal of motherhood again, because Chi-Shu's resilience is explored through her constant negotiation of her son's identity. She doesn't just shield him from the father, she actively works to ensure Xiao Nuo's sense of self isn't dependent on the sudden appearance of a powerful benefactor. There's a beautifully written scene where she takes him to visit her own modest family home, a place from which she had previously sought escape, grounding him in the reality of where she came from, showing him that strength isn't about wealth but about persistence, and she does this specifically to counteract the creeping influence of Jiang Nanyang's opulent world, which threatens to redefine happiness for her son as merely the acquisition of expensive things. This refusal to let her son be defined by the father's wealth is her ultimate act of tang, her ultimate assertion of her own narrative, a narrative built 6 years before his father even knew he existed, and the film handles this carefully, ensuring that she is not rejecting Jiang Nanyang's genuine attempts at connection, but rejecting the values that his world often represents: superficiality, transactional relationships, and emotional distance. As the story moves toward its climax, the focus shifts from external threats to internal honesty, particularly concerning the necklace itself. We learn, through a brief but crucial flashback triggered by a conversation with an old friend of Chi-Shu's, that the necklace wasn't originally Jiang Nanyang's, it was a gift from his own estranged father, a piece he always felt obligated to wear but never truly connected with, making its presence in the alley that night a matter of routine rather than destiny, which slightly undercuts the fated feeling but ironically strengthens the theme of chosen family, as the bond formed between Chi-Shu, Xiao Nuo, and Jiang Nanyang is built on real-time interaction, not on some mystical alignment of objects. When Chi-Shu finally decides to tell Jiang Nanyang the full story of that night, the fear, the uncertainty of the pregnancy, the feeling of utter isolation as she made the monumental choice to raise the child alone, believing him to be gone forever, it's not a dramatic confession meant to elicit immediate forgiveness, but a necessary clearing of the slate, an act of vulnerability that requires him to listen without interrupting or trying to fix it, and this is where he finally earns the audience's complete trust. He doesn't offer solutions, he absorbs the pain she carried alone, acknowledging the sheer weight of her decision and the silent suffering that accompanied it, realizing that his own trauma, while real, was never the sole narrative of suffering in this situation. This shared, honest accounting of the past allows the final, delicate reconciliation to feel earned, not forced. The pacing in this latter section is noticeably slower, almost meditative, as if the film itself is taking a deep breath after holding tension for so long, allowing the audience to process the weight of 6 years compressed into agonizingly slow realization. We see fewer grand pronouncements and more quiet moments, Jiang Nanyang sitting with Qi Shu in their new, smaller apartment, not trying to buy them a mansion, but simply being present while she organizes the chaos of their shared life, learning the rhythm of their existing dynamic instead of trying to impose his own. The cultural resonance of this type of ending, focusing on functional co-parenting over instant romantic fusion, is significant. It speaks to a modern understanding that true partnership often requires respecting boundaries and recognizing the primacy of the child's established stability, something that older romantic narratives often ignored in favor of the couple's immediate satisfaction. The film's final scene, the school event, acts as a beautiful, understated thesis statement. They are a unit, defined not by a marriage certificate or a continuous relationship since the alley incident, but by their shared commitment to Xiao Nuo's happiness. When the performance ends and Xiao Nuo beams at them, the composition of the shot is crucial. The three of them are slightly overlapping, framed together against the backdrop of the ordinary school hall, symbolizing that their connection is now organic, integrated into the fabric of their everyday existence, rather than being a sudden, disruptive force. Even the camera movement, which had been so tense and angular throughout the corporate struggles, becomes soft, almost handheld, mirroring the natural ebb and flow of a family unit finally finding its comfortable footing. So, while the film navigates the well-trodden paths of the genre, the rich savior, the independent heroine, the secret child, its true success lies in its commitment to the difficult, unglamorous work of repair and reconciliation that follows the initial drama. It suggests that strength, the tang of the title, isn't just about surviving the storm, it's about having the courage to rebuild something honest in the aftermath, even if that rebuilt structure looks different, and perhaps more functional, than the perfect fairy tale initially promised. This movie resonates because it offers a mature, if still deeply sentimental, vision of modern family formation, built on acknowledgement, shared responsibility, and the undeniable, beautiful pull of a small boy who just wanted his dad to finally see him. And the more I sit with this film in my head, the more little details start to surface. The kind of things you don't always notice on a first watch because you're too wrapped up in the big emotional swings, but once the tears dry and your heart rate returns to something like normal, you start to realize how carefully constructed so many of its moments are, and how Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak kita quietly earns its emotional punches rather than simply demanding them. And I want to circle back and walk through some of those layers with you, like we're replaying a really good, story-heavy game on New Game Plus, and suddenly all the dialogue hits differently because we know where it's going now. Think back to that opening sequence in the rain, the night that changed everything. On a surface level, it's a functional inciting incident. Girl meets powerful man under extreme circumstances, saves him, they part without truly knowing each other. But pay attention to how it's shot, there's this constant interplay between isolation and connection. The rain is so loud it almost becomes white noise, this wall of sound that isolates each character in their own bubble, and yet the camera keeps cutting between them as if insisting that these two lonelinesses are on a collision course. When Jiang Nanyang stumbles, when the knife flashes, when Qi Shu's hand closes around that necklace with blood on her fingers, what's really happening is a merging of worlds that were never meant to touch. In a way, that entire scene is like an origin story not just for their relationship, but for the film's main visual language, light and dark, wet and dry, order and chaos constantly bleeding into each other. On a rewatch, you realize how her terrified courage in that moment foreshadows every big choice she makes later, and how his instinct, even in near unconsciousness, to try to pull out his wallet, to solve danger with transactions, hints at the long road he'll walk to understanding that some debts can't be settled with money. And then there's the way the film uses that 6-year time jump. It's not just a narrative shortcut, it's a statement. We don't see the pregnancy, the birth, the earliest years of Xiao Nuo's life, and that puts us in a strangely parallel position to Jiang Nanyang. We missed those years too. We are, in a sense, complicit in his absence. That's a bold move for a story that hinges so much on motherhood, because a different, more conventional version might have given us a long-suffering montage of Chi-Shu working while heavily pregnant, giving birth alone, juggling night feeds and daytime jobs. Those images would have been powerful, sure, but by skipping them, the film prioritizes not the heroic spectacle of her struggle, but the intimacy of the bond that exists now. It forces us to accept that there is part of their story we will never fully see, just as Jiang can never fully catch up on those lost years, no matter how much he tries. And if you watch closely, the film keeps coming back to this idea of things we missed, of off-screen sacrifices hinted at but never fully displayed. The grandmother's regrets, for example, are never shown in long flashbacks. We don't see her younger, making mistakes with her son. We just feel the weight of that past every time she reaches out to Xiao Nuo with a tentative sort of awe, like she's handling something very fragile, a second chance she doesn't quite believe she deserves. One of my favorite subtle things about her character is how her style changes across the film. At first, she's dressed in the impeccable, slightly cold way of someone used to playing the corporate wife, all structured blouses and pearls, but as she spends more time with her grandson, you catch her in more comfortable clothes, a cardigan with a stain from cooking together, flat shoes instead of heels. It's such a tiny thing, but it visually narrates her own quiet transformation from figurehead to hands-on grandmother. And it's not just her. Think about the friend who has been with Chi-Shu from the beginning, the one who's seen her through the pregnancy, who helped babysit, who sat on cramped apartment floors sharing cheap takeout and heavy truths. In a more superficial version of this story, that friend character might exist purely as comic relief, the one who makes sassy comments and pushes the heroine toward the love interest. Here, although she does get some of the film's lighter lines, she also serves a crucial function. She's the one person allowed to challenge Chi-Shu's narrative about herself. When Chi-Shu insists that she's fine, that she doesn't need anyone's help, that she can keep working herself to exhaustion forever if it means proving she's strong, her friend is the one who calls that out for what it sometimes is, fear. There's a moment where she tells Chi-Shu, "You're allowed to be strong and still want someone to stand next to you, you know." Tang doesn't mean alone. That line lands because it's not just a motivational poster quote, it's coming from someone who has watched her burn herself out for years. It's also one of those distinctly cultural touches that hit differently if you've grown up in societies where women are praised for resilience almost as a consolation prize for not being supported. The film understands how strong woman can be both compliment and burden, and it interrogates that with more nuance than the title might initially suggest. On the other side, Jiang Nanyan's right-hand man, his assistant, his fixer, the guy who arranges cars, relays messages, cleans up little messes, ends up being a surprisingly interesting lens into Jiang's evolution. At first, he treats Xiao Nuo like just another task on the schedule: pick up the kid, drop him off, report back. There's a clinical efficiency to the way he says, "The child has been delivered safely," that underlines how foreign the world of diapers and homework is to their corporate machine. But as time goes on, you catch him softening too. He starts keeping candy in his pocket, bending down to speak to the boy at eye level, giving awkward but genuine smiles whenever Xiao Nuo draws him into childish games. In one almost throwaway scene, you see him scrolling through his phone and pausing on a picture he secretly snapped of Jiang and Xiao Nuo laughing together, and the small smile that creeps onto his face says everything. Even the people who orbit power but don't wield it are starving for these glimpses of uncomplicated joy. If Jiang's arc is about learning to be human first and CEO second, then his assistant's arc is about learning that loyalty isn't just delivering results, it's quietly, consistently rooting for your boss's happiness even when it might complicate the work. From a strictly cinematic perspective, one thing that impressed me was how intentionally the film uses physical distance and blocking to map emotional relationships. In early scenes, Jiang and Chi-Shu are almost never in the same frame unless they are arguing. When they talk, the camera will often cut back and forth between close-ups, emphasizing their separation. But as their relationship evolves from hostility to wary cooperation to something like mutual respect, we start to get more two shots, both of them in the same frame, side by side, even if they are looking in different directions. It's especially noticeable in scenes involving Xiao Nuo. The first time they stand shoulder to shoulder is when he's on stage for that school performance, and both parents lean forward at the same moment, holding their breath. The camera pulls back just enough to include both of their faces in the same field, as if the lens itself is acknowledging, okay, whether they like it or not, They are now a unit in this specific context, they are the audience for this child's life. Similarly, the way sets are dressed tells subtle truths. Jiang's home, at the beginning, is immaculate but sterile. Aside from a few art pieces and perfectly arranged books, there's very little that suggests a real person lives there. Even his bedroom looks like it could be a high-end hotel. As the story progresses, new items creep in, a forgotten toy on the couch, a coloring book on the coffee table, a magnet on the fridge that clashes horribly with the sleek design. None of this is shouted, the camera doesn't zoom in and make a big deal of it. It's just there, quietly signaling that his life has been permanently altered by the presence of this small, chaotic human. And yet, in Chishu's spaces, where life has always been cluttered and full, the visual journey is almost the opposite. Her new apartment in the other city, while smaller, begins to look less like a fortress and more like a home that's open to visits, to the idea that someone might sit at her table who isn't just her son or her best friend. It's as if both of their environments are inching toward a middle ground where warmth and structure can coexist. I also want to spend a moment on the film's sound design, because while the score is emotionally evocative, it's the strategic use of silence that really stands out. Silence is terrifying for someone like Jiang Nanyang, who's used to filling every moment with noise, conference calls, clicking keyboards, the hum of an engine, the low murmur of important men in expensive suits. Early on, whenever he is on screen alone, there's always some kind of atmospheric noise around him, underscoring the idea that he never truly stops. But in key scenes with Xiao Nuo or Chishu, especially when they are on the verge of a breakthrough or a breakdown, the background sound drops out almost entirely. You get these pockets of quiet where every breath, every rustle of clothing, every small shift in posture becomes loud, and it forces both the characters and us to sit with the discomfort. There's a particularly powerful moment where Jiang is sitting on the floor, back against the wall outside Xiao Nuo's bedroom, after the boy has had a nightmare. He's just been allowed in, for the first time, to sit at the edge of the bed and comfort his son, and when he comes back out, he doesn't go back to his work, he just slides down the wall and sits there, shell-shocked by the intensity of the feeling. In that scene, there's almost no music at all, just the muffled sound of a clock ticking somewhere. The absence of his usual soundscape is a sonic representation of the emptiness he's suddenly becoming aware of in his old life. On the flip side, Chishu's life is full of noise from the start, the clatter of cheap cookware, neighbors yelling, kids playing in the stairwell, the hiss of a bus door. Her journey is about carving out moments of quiet for herself in that chaos, and the film beautifully shows this in little rituals, the way she sometimes sits on the rooftop, eyes closed, letting the city hum below her while she steals a few minutes for her own thoughts. Later, when her life gets entangled with Jiang's world and the media, the noise around her rises to an almost unbearable level, reporters shouting questions, phones ringing constantly, and you can feel her suffocating under it. That makes it all the more meaningful when, near the end, she and Jiang share their first truly peaceful conversation on that same rooftop in her new city, the stars faint above the city glow. The sounds of traffic soft instead of overwhelming. It's not framed as some grand romantic date, it's just two tired people finally having a conversation without the world pressing in on them, and the sound design treats it like sacred ground. If we zoom out and place this film within the broader landscape of 2025 content, it's entering a space where audiences have become very savvy to melodrama. People know the tropes now, they recognize the secret baby, the CEO and ordinary girl, the misunderstanding that drives them apart. You can't just play those beats straight and expect to get away with it anymore, at least not with a jaded audience that's seen hundreds of these tales in series form. What Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak kita does, much like a well-written story-driven game that leans into familiar mechanics but with a twist, is to treat those familiar elements as the frame, not the painting. The secret child isn't just a plot device to force them together, he's a fully realized character with his own needs and arc. The CEO isn't redeemed only through romance, he's challenged on multiple fronts, as a son, as a boss, as a public figure. The strong woman isn't rewarded for her suffering with a rich husband, she is asked, repeatedly, what she actually wants beyond survival, and the film respects her enough to let her take time to answer that. There's also something interesting in how the movie handles public versus private selves. We live in an age where social media has blurred those lines, and the film leans into that by making the media circus not just background noise but a character in its own right. The moment the story of the secret heir breaks, everyone has an opinion. There are online commenters who romanticize it, fans who turn it into memes and hashtags, anti-fans who weaponize it against Jiang's company. In one quietly chilling scene, Chishu stumbles on a comment thread where strangers are debating her worth as a mother, scoring her choices like they are rating a restaurant, and you see the hurt on her face as she scrolls. It's a reminder that in this world, people feel entitled not just to consume other people's stories, but to edit and rate them, forgetting there are actual lives at the center of the narrative. That's a very 2025 sensibility, and it hits hard if you've ever seen how quickly real-world scandals devolve into entertainment for people far removed from the fallout. At the same time, the film shows the other side of that coin, the possibility of community. There are also supportive comments, strangers who share their own experiences as children of single parents, or as parents who had to fight for custody, and while those messages don't erase the pain of the cruel ones, they become tiny lifelines. This duality of the online world, both cruel and empathetic, is something the movie handles in a refreshingly balanced way. It doesn't romanticize the internet, but it also doesn't demonize it as a monolith. It's a reflection of the people who use it, for better or worse. In that sense, the film subtly encourages viewers to think about how they participate in collective storytelling. Are you the kind of person who cheers for someone's growth, or the kind who mocks their vulnerability? When it comes to the performances, I could honestly do a whole separate breakdown video just on micro-expressions alone. The actor playing Jiang Nanyang does so much with his eyes that you almost don't need his dialogue. Watch his gaze whenever he looks at Xiao Nuo in the later parts of the film. There's always this flicker of disbelief, like he still can't quite accept that this miraculous, infuriating, hilarious little person is connected to him, that he's allowed to love him this much. In the hospital scene, when the doctor delivers the news that the illness is under control and there's no long-term danger, there's this split second where his eyes shine, then he quickly looks away and wipes his face as if he's trying to hide even from himself how scared he was. That toxic masculinity conditioning runs so deep that even in a moment of pure relief, his first instinct is to defend his vulnerability from witnesses, including his own heart. Chishu's actress, on the other hand, excels at a very different kind of expressiveness, the way she swallows her pain to keep functioning. There's a scene after their big argument about leaving the city where she goes into the bathroom, locks the door, and we watch, in one uninterrupted take, as she slides down to the floor and lets herself cry. But even then, it's a controlled cry, like she's learned not to sob too loudly in case her son hears. You see decades of emotional training in that moment, the way women are socialized to break quietly, out of sight. The camera doesn't intrude with close-ups, it stays at a respectful distance, framing her through the slightly ajar doorway, and it feels almost too intimate, like we've overheard something we weren't meant to. And with Xiao Nuo, it's all in the physicality. The way he runs full speed into his mom's arms, throws his whole tiny body into hugs, the way he fidgets when he's lying, the way his shoulders slump when he thinks he's disappointed someone. Kids often act with their whole bodies, and the directing here wisely leans into that, allowing him to be messy and unpolished, which paradoxically makes his performance feel more authentic than some overly rehearsed child roles. I also have to acknowledge that the film doesn't shy away from showing how messy co-parenting can be even when everyone has the best intentions. There are scheduling conflicts, miscommunications, and moments where either Jiang or Chishu has to cancel time with their son due to emergencies. One particularly brutal scene shows Jiang promising Xiao Nuo he'll be at a school event, only for a sudden company crisis to pull him away last minute. We cut to Xiao Nuo on stage, scanning the crowd, face slowly falling when he doesn't see his father. The camera then cuts between the boy's small, forced smile as he goes through the motions of his performance, and Jiang in a boardroom, his expression distraught even as he's trying to fix a multi-million-dollar crisis. The easy version of this scene would make Jiang a villain for not showing up, but life is more complicated than that, and the film honors that complexity. Later, when they talk about it, Chishu doesn't let him off the hook, but she also acknowledges that she knows what it's like to be torn between survival and presence. They both carry guilt, they both wish they could clone themselves, and in that shared frustration, there's the seed of a deeper understanding. In terms of genre, something I really appreciate is how the film navigates the line between romance and family drama. It would have been very easy to center their romantic tension as the main course and relegate parenting to the side dish, something that conveniently brings them together for cute scenes. Instead, the narrative priority is flipped, parenting is the main arena, and their romantic possibilities emerge as a byproduct of how they show up for their child and for themselves. When they first start to share small, affectionate gestures, a hand on a shoulder, a shared joke, a moment of silent support, it feels earned because we've watched them build trust as co-parents, not just as potential lovers. That might disappoint viewers who came in hungry for heavy romantic tropes, but for me, it made whatever tenderness we do get feel so much more satisfying. It's like in a long, narrative-driven RPG where the romance options hit harder if you've actually done the character's side quests, if you've earned that intimacy through choices and time rather than having it handed to you in a cutscene. And yeah, let's talk a bit about this from a gamer's mindset, because on Bongo Gaming we're used to discussing branching narratives, player agency, the weight of choice, and in a strange way, Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak kita plays out like one of those choice-heavy visual novels where no path gives you a perfect ending, just different configurations of joy and regret. If you imagine this story as a game, Chishu's early decision not to tell Jiang about the pregnancy is like one of those irreversible choices that lock off entire branches of content. Later, when she debates whether to accept his help, whether to move to another city, whether to fight for full custody or share it, each option represents a different ending, none of which is purely good or bad. The film we get is like the route where everyone sacrifices a little bit of what they want in order to build something sustainable for the person who can't choose, the child. From that perspective, the story invites us to think not just, did they do the right thing, but, given their starting stats, their traumas, their social constraints, could they have chosen differently? That doesn't absolve anyone, but it humanizes their decisions. This ties into another aspect I found compelling, the film's treatment of forgiveness. We throw that word around a lot in narratives, characters say, "I forgive you," and suddenly everything is fixed. Here, forgiveness is portrayed more as a process than a single moment. There isn't a scene where Chishu dramatically declares she forgives Jiang for not being there. Instead, there are dozens of small choices where she lets go of a bit of her anger in favor of cooperation, times when she could weaponize his guilt but chooses not to. On his end, forgiving her for hiding their son, and forgiving himself for his earlier emotional unavailability, doesn't happen in one cathartic monologue. It shows up in how he responds when something reminds him of the lost years, in whether he clings to resentment or channels that energy into being more present now. Similarly, Xiao Nuo's forgiveness toward both of them comes in how he keeps testing their reliability, how he gradually stops asking, "Will you be there?" and starts assuming, "You're coming, right?" The shift from anxious questioning to quiet trust is one of the most beautiful character arcs in the film, and it's handled almost entirely without words. Culturally, the film also taps into evolving conversations around what a family is allowed to look like. In societies where the traditional image of a two-parent, married, same-class household is still held up as the ideal, stories like this one, where the parents are not married, where the mother has carved out her own life independently, where the father has to learn to respect that autonomy, are quietly radical. The film never uses the words, unmarried mother, like a moral judgment, it simply shows her reality. When other characters do judge her, the camera's perspective aligns with her, not with her critics. That matters, because media shapes norms. Seeing a narrative where the central question is not, will she be validated by marriage, but, will these adults act in the best interest of their child while respecting each other as individuals, reflects and possibly nudges forward the values of the audience. That said, the movie isn't some stark, gritty social realist piece, it still has that sheen of idealism. Jiang Nanyang, for all his flaws, is still an unusually introspective, willing to change man for someone of his power and upbringing. Reality has plenty of men who would take the secret child revelation as an excuse to further control the mother or avoid responsibility entirely. But that's the sweet spot stories often aim for, not a direct mirror of the worst case, but a sort of aspirational model of what could happen if people confronted with messy, painful truths actually chose growth over ego. Watching him choose, again and again, to stay in the discomfort until it reshapes him is part of what makes the film cathartic. There's also something almost meta about how the film positions fate. That necklace, the mall coincidence, the way their paths cross again and again, these are all strokes of luck, or destiny, depending on how romantic you are. But after fate does its job putting them in each other's orbit, it steps back. The universe doesn't reorganize itself to make their lives easier after that. There's no miraculous erasure of the media scandal, no deus ex machina inheritance that solves all of Chishu's financial struggles without strings. They still have to grind. They still have to have uncomfortable conversations. In that sense, the film seems to argue that fate is just the introduction, the real story is in the choices after the meet cute. The romantic in us might love the idea of soulmates, but the grown-up in us knows that even soulmates have to do the dishes, show up for parent-teacher conferences, apologize when they screw up. This story, in its quieter moments, is very much about the dishes and the conferences. I keep coming back, too, to that courtroom sequence, because I think that's where the film's writing is at its sharpest. A lesser script would turn the custody hearing into a simple battle of good vs evil, with the rich, emotionally clueless father on one side and the saintly, struggling mother on the other. Here, the lawyers present their cases with all the legalese you'd expect: incomes, living conditions, educational opportunities. On paper, Jiang Nanyang has all the advantages. His file is thick with documents proving his capacity to provide. Chishu's lawyer, by contrast, leans on character witnesses and intangible factors, years of care, attachment, daily routines. Listening to them, you can feel the inadequacy of the system to weigh love. At one point, the judge asks a standard, almost perfunctory question: what would be in the best interest of the child? And the film cuts not to the lawyers or the parents, but to a half-empty juice box Xiao Nuo left on a bench outside the courtroom, condensation dripping down the side. It's a strangely poetic cut, suggesting that the real, best interest, isn't in this room at all, it's in that hallway, in the mundane objects and moments that make up his actual life. And when the ruling ultimately comes down not as a total victory for either parent but as a shared arrangement with conditions, you might feel a little frustrated. No one gets the absolute moral high ground, no one is declared the winner. But that's precisely the point. The film refuses to let the legal decision be the final word. It keeps asking, okay, and what will you do with this now? Because plenty of people win or lose in court and then either squander that outcome or rise above it. In showing us the months after, the everyday labor of making that shared custody work, the film underscores that institutions can only sketch the outline of justice, people have to color it in. Another layer worth mentioning is how the movie frames work, not just as a plot necessity but as a core part of the characters' identities. We've talked a lot about Jiang as a CEO, but Chishu's jobs, plural, are treated with equal seriousness. Early on, we see her in a series of positions: waitress, part-time office assistant, freelance translator later, each one requiring different skills, different faces. The film doesn't mock any of these roles or treat them as temporary until she's rescued into a life of leisure. Instead, it emphasizes how competent she is in all of them. There's a small but powerful scene where Xiao Nuo, after spending a day in Jiang's gleaming office tower, says something like, "Dad's work looks more important than yours," and the way the air goes tense is palpable. Chishu could snap back, could scold him, but instead she takes a breath and explains, in kid-friendly terms, that importance doesn't only come from big buildings or lots of money, that making sure people get their food or their documents or their translations done is also important. Later, Jiang overhears Xiao Nuo proudly telling someone that, "Mom does 3 jobs, so she's 3 times as important," and you see that land in his mind. It's a beautiful example of how the film doesn't undermine one parent's role to uplift the other. It raises the value of unseen labor instead of diminishing visible success. All of this builds toward that ending we talked about, the walkway after the school performance, the shared bag, the quiet smile. Some might call it anticlimactic, especially if they came in expecting a sweeping proposal under fireworks, but for me, that restraint is exactly right. Life doesn't always give you a perfect, cinematic closure. More often, it offers you a series of small choices to move in the direction of healing or away from it. That final image, 3 figures walking down a regular street in regular clothes, no dramatic backlighting, just the kind of golden hour light you can see outside your own window, feels like an invitation. It's as if the film is saying, this is what happily ever after actually looks like, not a freeze-frame kiss, but the decision to keep walking together, bags in hand, through whatever comes next. So when I think about Sang Wanita Tangguh Datang Membawa Anak kita as a whole experience, not just as a plot to summarize, what lingers isn't the taglines or even the dramatic first act hook, it's the emotional honesty layered under its melodramatic skin. It's the way it respects its characters enough not to give them easy answers, the way it holds space for a woman's right to be both fiercely independent and vulnerably desiring of partnership, the way it allows a powerful man to be brought to his knees not by a corporate collapse but by the realization of how much of his own heart he's kept locked away. It's the memory of a child's hopeful voice in a mall saying, "Are ya?" to a stranger, and the long, complicated journey that follows from daring to speak that word out loud. And for us, as viewers, especially those of us who spend a lot of time immersed in fictional worlds, whether in games or films, there's a quiet challenge embedded here, to look up from the screen once the story is over and ask ourselves where, in our own lives, we might be called to make the harder, more generous choice, to forgive without forgetting, to show up when it would be easier to walk away, to let someone else's strength coexist with our support instead of feeling threatened by it. Because if there's one thing this film makes painfully clear, it's that fate might set the stage, but it's what we do in the unglamorous aftermath, the hospital corridors, the late-night arguments, the awkward apologies, the shared walks home, that truly defines whether we become each other's ghosts or each other's home.